From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Chris Payne. It's Tuesday, April 18. Kris Ridgway is a conman who used his position at a respected financial firm to push unauthorised, high-risk investment products to his trusting clients. He made at least $1.6 million in commissions, but his investors haven't seen a cent. And now he's confessed.
I'm trying to tell people I'm sorry. I'm trying to be honest with myself.
Ridgway was part of a dubious investment scheme that's left Australian families millions of dollars out of pocket. He tells Adele Ferguson in a joint investigation with 60 Minutes that he's hit rock bottom, that he's ashamed of his acts and that he fears ending up in a prison cell.
I was so ashamed I wanted to hide and run away and try and sort this matter out and then come back.
Today, Adele reveals the surprise phone call that led to Ridgway's stunning confession and the clients he bled dry. Adele, you've reported on Ridgway in the past, but I wanted to ask you about how this story came about. It's quite extraordinary watching someone confess on camera like this.
Yeah, it certainly is. It came about, as you rightly say, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age had written about Kris Ridgway just over a year ago, about him getting sacked from Shaw and Partners and how he had been involved in, selling products off the books and getting secret commissions. So fast forward to March the 4th, and we put another story in the paper, and this time it was about how he was trying to tell his wife to lie to the regulator if they call, because of the forged signatures he'd done hundreds of them. And I'd sent him a text. I'd tried to call him to get a right of reply, and he'd ignored it. I sent him a series of questions, he'd ignored those. So the story comes out in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. It's on page 1, and it's about how he'd told his wife to lie to the regulator because he'd forged signatures of her, his mother-in-law, etc., etc. And he rang up and he was saying, "I'm really sorry, I should have spoken to you. I want to confess."
I'm trying to tell people I'm sorry. I'm trying to be honest with myself.
I thought it would just make great TV to have him on national television, confessing to what he'd done.
I was really just thinking about myself and not the well-being of my family and my kids. And it's devastated my kids and it's devastated my wife.
On the phone call, he'd said he admitted to forging his wife's signatures, putting her in companies she didn't know, and lying to the regulator.
I'm here today because my life is at rock bottom.
And that's really how it came about. And you're probably going to wonder what was the motivation for that? I think it was because he knew that, the clock was ticking for him.
It certainly does make for staggering television. But let's take a step back. Can you tell us who is Kris Ridgway and when did he start to run this dubious investment scheme off the books?
Kris Ridgway was a senior financial advisor at Shaw and Partners, which is, one of the biggest stockbroking outfits in the country. And he was working there since 2013. And in 2015, he meets a man called David Sutton, who tells him about these international products and tells him, if you sell them to your clients, you'll get a 17% commission. Now, 17% commission is a staggering amount of money because the general commission is 0.5%, maybe 1%. So to get 17% every time you sell a product is gobsmacking.
As you can see, they are quite prolific in their production of information.
So it's a sophisticated scheme.
Very sophisticated.
He decided, bugger it, I'm going to do something for myself. So he got $1.6 million in secret commissions, which is illegal. In other words, he didn't tell his clients he was getting these secret kickbacks to induce them to buy these products.
I figured, well, bugger it, I'm going to do something for myself, and it was the wrong decision to make.
Now, Ridgway told you on 60 Minutes that he feels he's been hung out to dry and made the fall guy, those are his words, by two men he says ran the scheme with him. What can you tell me about Andy Turner and David Sutton?
Yeah, so they're very interesting people in this. So Kris Ridgway was a middleman or an introducer to these products. He didn't create the products. He was just flogging them to clients. And there are a number of them out there who were flogging these products. And Andy Turner and David Sutton are allegedly the people, the masterminds, the architects of this scheme. David Sutton is based in Australia. He lives in Sydney. And he runs a broking house called McFadden's Securities. So he's been doing analyst reports on these products. He's been selling these products. He's on the board of one of these companies. He's intimately involved. And then there is Andy Turner, who's based in London. And he is believed to be the man behind these.
So you tried to speak to both men that we just talked about. What happened when you approached them at their homes in Sydney and in London?
Well, David Sutton was at his home. I knocked on his door and he didn't answer. I could hear him inside. Then I rang him and he didn't respond. I sent him text messages and then he got back to me to say, Adele, my lawyers have told me not to speak to you. Andy Turner slammed the door in the reporter's face.
Just slammed the door in their face?
Slammed the door in their face. He later responded to some questions where he denied any wrongdoing. And he said he believed all investors were sophisticated and they ought to have properly understood the risks associated with the investments in these sort of private companies.
Let's talk about the families who've been impacted by this scheme. One of them was a widow of a close friend of Ridgway's, is that right?
That's right. Leith Reynolds should have been retired by now, but she had known Kris Ridgway for more than 30 years. Her husband had given him his first job in financial services. So they go back a long way, so she really trusted him. And then when he went to Shaw and Partners, it was sort of a double whammy. As she says, you know, if you can't trust a national firm and a financial advisor to give you advice when you need it, who can you trust? Were her words. And that's exactly right. She trusted him. He said he had this great product. It was about to list. So it really wasn't risky at all. It's about to list and it's going to make you a lot of money. And so she fell for it and she put her money into the scheme. A few days later, he contacts her again and says, do you have any more? It's so good. Do you have any more money? So she plunders her superannuation scheme. And as she says, she was a stay-at-home mum, so she didn't have much. So she put the lot in. And he strung her along for years. She would get communications allegedly under Shaw letterhead, where it's got these unlisted shares have gone from X cents to many dollars, meaning that her investment had gone up more than 10 times. So she thought she was really wealthy until she realised they keep on making excuses for this company not listing. What the hell is going on? It's now been 7 years and it was meant to list within a few weeks. What on earth is going on? And that's what all of the investors started to think, what is going on here?
I was going to ask you about when some of the investors started to realise things weren't perhaps as they seemed. What were some of the actions that they took or tried to take?
So they started to think something was fishy, probably in 2019, 2020, because they were desperate for cash. Definitely in 2020 because COVID had hit. And Darren Walker needed to get some money out. He put over $200,000 into these schemes and he hadn't worked for 6 weeks and money was really tight.
It was like your life was on hold for years because you're waiting for the 6 weeks or the 3 months or whatever and then making plans and trying to do things like that because you'd ask them all the way to the end. You know, is this really going to happen? Yeah, it's going to happen.
He wrote to Andy Turner in an email saying, mate, I am going to end up in a caravan park. When are these shares going to list? And some of them just wanted to sell some shares to get some money so they could live. And no one was buying them. And so they realised on paper they look fantastic, but there's no buyers in the market. So what are we looking at here? So they started to dig deeper and started trawling the internet and, you know, doing searches and trying to find out what exactly were these products that they'd invested in because the accounts were unaudited. They're all based in tax havens. They're opaque. There was no central office. What the heck are these products?
A sham, a big global sham, and probably one of the biggest, I think, in terms of the firms involved that I've certainly heard or seen in Australia to date.
Now, ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, is the regulator in charge of things like this. What are they doing, if anything, about this? And is any part of this scheme or schemes still going?
The scheme is still going. ASIC have been asleep at the wheel. You know, they'll say they've been investigating behind the scenes, but if you look at Kris Ridgway, they knew a year ago that he had been involved in secret commissions, he was selling products off the books, and he was forging his wife's signature. It has taken them to now to ban him for life. Why does it take so long? They interviewed him last April, just a couple of weeks after the first story came out, and then it took them 9 months to just give him a transcript. And now, just the other day, they've banned him. So you have to say, what on earth is going on with ASIC? And then the same with these financial products. 2017, Stephen Hellberg, who had worked in part of the empire, actually contacted ASIC and said, you need to look into these products. I can't find the assets. This is a man who has been an auditor for 40 years. And we're now in 2023, and what on earth is ASIC doing?
Well, you can read part 2 of Adele's series in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age today. Part 3 is coming tomorrow. Adele, thanks so much for joining. Please explain.
Thank you.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Julia Carr-Katzel. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Chris Payne. This is Please Explain. Thank you for listening.